I would like to formally open the annual general meeting for 2018 of the Wireless Institute. You've just been introduced to the directors, so we'll move on. The attendance register, which we have out there, is the register of all of our attendance. And I now call for, please, if you haven't signed the register or at least given your membership number when you came through that door, can you please do that after the AGM, so we have a record of your attendance. Apologies. Are there any apologies from the floor?
Megan Dan Wye, VK2 GGL.
Any others?
Judy, VK2HZV.
VK2HZV. Peter?
Just a quick VK5ATQ.
5ATQ. ATQ? Yep. 5ATQ. There's no ATQ. VK1 DSH?
We've got Dale.
Okay.
VK5 DW.
VK4 Whiskey Mike, Wayne Billwood.
Terry, VK2 Mike Tango Juliet.
Mike Tango Juliet. Cool. And up the back, Ray?
Not Burton, VK3F5.
VK3F5, yep.
And Terry Bryant, VK3KYF.
3 KYF or 2 KYF?
Terry Bryant.
And what was the call sign? 3, okay. KYF or TF? What was Kerry's call sign? It was VK3K...
QIZ.
Yeah.
Use the microphone.
Sorry, Ray. The call sign again for Kerry.
Gary's call sign is VK3, Kilo, Foxtrot Yankee. KYF.
KYF.
Kilo Yankee.
Thanks, Ray. Cheers. Any other...
I've put a list on the list.
Okay, cool.
Apologies.
Which includes VK4RG, Ron, VK4LKB, Kerry, and VK4FARR, Glenn.
And I've got a couple of questions.
Okay, Phil?
Peter Young, VK3MB, and Fred Swainston, VK3DA.
We've got both of those.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Just so everyone knows, the registration of proxies and Peter, did you go through the voting cards? What they mean?
No.
No, okay. If you have a green membership card, then that is your voting card. There is also a yellow voting card out there, and the yellow voting card is actually a proxy card and has a number on it. So if you hold up that proxy card, if we get to the point where we actually have to have a division, then we will actually be looking at those proxy cards fairly closely because they have a number on them with the votes represented. So, and if you don't have a green or a yellow card, then you cannot vote. You're a non-member. So that's how, and that's the proxies as they stand as of Friday at 9 AM. The acceptance of the minutes. The minutes were published on the website. The minutes, can I just point out, the minutes actually also contain, as per the agreement given by the chair of the last AGM, also contain the information pack from last year that was handed out in the information pack. So it's the minutes of last year, and it is also that information pack as an appendix. So can I start off by having someone to move that they are an accurate representation of last year's proceedings, please? Trent Sampson's, VK4TS, and a seconder.
I'll take it.
I think I'll go from the floor. VK2VE. Okay, any discussion about those particular minutes? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, all those in favour, please. Okay, and any against? Okay, that's carried. Okay. I stand actually in front of you, probably, it shouldn't be this card, it should be an L plate. When I first stood for director, I had no idea that I would end up as president of this wonderful peak body of representing Australian radio amateurs. Suffice it to say, the learning curve looks like very Everest-like from base camp 1. The key focus for the board has been ensuring that all activities of the Institute are, of course, directed towards the objectives of the Institute, and we've embarked on a fairly ambitious change agenda. As the peak body, we represent radio amateurs obviously in Australia and also internationally, and these objectives that we are following distill to a couple of survival goals. One of them is to lobby for and protect the spectrum access, and the second one is to ensure survival through continued relevance of this wonderful hobby. Attracting new amateurs, their training, assessment, qualifications and we undertake in partnership with affiliated clubs and all clubs, including the functions that we undertake under the deed with the ACMA. All work is to achieve those objectives, and there's a bit of a theme I think you'll see here. This is a challenging and large change program currently in play, and as we all know, cultural change doesn't take months, it takes years. This change agenda is to shift this organisation into a much more sustainable and future-proofed model. One that we can fund development, we can fund ideas, grants, educate and train amateurs of the future, and we have no single points of risk. And, probably most importantly, we self-determine our future in an international, national and local regulatory landscape. So, to start to achieve this, the current board is focused on being more open and transparent with members, and such as publishing the board minutes every month. We are putting out terms of reference for all the committees eventually, position descriptions and many other documents. It's trying to consult with members more widely through a wider range of mechanisms, and we are always listening. The board is also actively making the organisation more sustainable with a longer term focus, and the 2018 budget, which I think Greg will talk about in the financial statements section, has a high level of provisioning for a range of commitments. The 2017-18 board suffered from a lack of documented organisational memory of the WIA. We were helped out by the previous board, but this especially occurred in the finance area. It's back under control. The board is addressing this through revised organisational structure changes, increased focus on process improvement and alleviating, as I said, those single points of sensitivity and risk. As anticipated and advised prior to by the board, the WIA posts a deficit for 2017, and you'll see that in the financial statements. The board has already put in place measures to improve this in the financial year 2018, and we are seeing those improvements already through a balanced budget. The board continues to be of the opinion that bookkeeping is the best performed by an external company for the sake of consistency and continuity, because of the significant amount of manual data entry and reconciliation that's required. Streamlining and automation planned in the future will hopefully see this requirement diminish through time. Membership numbers continue to be of great concern to the board, as we see a year-on-year drop in membership, predominantly concessional members. The board has decided to continue concessional member rates And we also have membership engagement as a constant focus of the board, along with attracting new members, and this will be one of our primary focuses in 2018. The board has also introduced an associates program to promote and market amateur radio to non-amateur radio operators. And you'll hear a bit about that in the Beyond 2020 presentation. There are over 100 volunteers, well over 100 volunteers, Australia-wide, who perform the various functions of the Institute, as well as two brilliant staff members who I send a huge thank you to, and all those volunteers as well. The board is actively working towards steering, not rowing, this organisation, but that goal remains elusive to date. We're working on it. The board also views the LCD submission, which you'll hear about in the presentations this afternoon, as this once-in-a-lifetime chance to position this experimental hobby into the future. The session later today will give people at the conference a sneak preview and an outline of what will be in that submission before it goes back to you guys, the members, for their final comments and then submitted to the ACMA. The board has an excellent working relationship with the ACMA and is actively planning what the amateur radio service will look like under the new Radio Communications Act, along with the new service contract arrangements after the deed expires in February 2019. It is recognised that any new contractual arrangement with the ACMA will need to be based on a real cost of delivering the service, and this will more than likely increase cost of service. The voluntary contribution to these activities by the WIA nominated training organisation and the assessors and the many others at the institute and club levels provide a service that is at far lower cost than could otherwise be offered, particularly by a commercial for-profit organisation. The board is actively involved in the IARU Region 3 and ITU activities and funds its commitment to send representatives to these activities. This international representation does not come cheap, but members have told us loud and clear that it is one of the primary reasons that they support the Institute. As a volunteer, not-for-profit organisation, the board is always seeking the skills of members who can help extend the scope, efficiency and effectiveness of the WIA. Not just technical skills, but also in the area of management, marketing, finance, media, strategy, etc. So if you are seriously thinking of helping out, please catch up with one of the board members during this weekend. And can I just say, we have a vacancy, a board vacancy currently, and we're actively looking for a female board member. I would lastly like to say thank you to my fellow board members who, like me, I am not sure we knew quite what we were volunteering for. I finish with those L plates and the learning curve again. I hope I've progressed to my P plates for the second year, and that learning curve looks a bit more like Mount Wellington for those who've been to Hobart. It's a nice place, but then I'm a little bit biased. Thank you. Okay, we move to the annual report to members, which you have in your pack. The annual report, can I have somebody to move that they accept as published the director's report? Call sign?
MK3 signal to noise ratio.
MK3 S&R. And a seconder.
MK2 Mike Tango Juliet.
MK2 Mike Tango Juliet. Okay, I open it up for any discussion. Any questions?
Please.
Take a roving mic.
Is there any truth to these persistent rumours on social media and other channels of fraud and mismanagement and corruption within the management of the WIA?
Do you want the simple answer? No, there isn't. That's the simple answer. I don't know whether you want any more detail.
I'm happy to give a slightly more extended
Come up here, Greg.
When we...
Stand close to the mic.
Oh, yeah, where is the mic? Is that working? Yeah, okay. When we started on this journey, we didn't, as I say, really know what we'd signed up for. But one of the things that was obviously around was that there was issues in terms of finances, and that was malfeasance and other things occurring. Okay, go to that one. Yeah, that's better. All right, that was the one I was looking for. So, when we started looking at the finances, the thing that we found was that there were, in fact, a number of issues with the finances. There are errors. Things have been. There was a period again before we came on board where there was no entry occurring into the MYOB accounting system. So at the end of 2016, there were still some outstanding issues in terms of the state of those accounts. What we as directors chose to do, well, actually, before I get on to that, there are also some issues that we put in a report to ACMA each year in terms of the transactions that we conduct for call sign management and for the examinations. And they get our full financial reports, and they'd actually identified in the 2016 reports an issue in terms of the under recovery, which means that we're not covering the full costs of running the examinations and call sign management. That's not new. But what they'd found is what they thought was a discrepancy in the accounts. What we decided to do as directors was, in fact, to engage auditors to actually go back through and review the 2016 accounts. And if I excuse me for a second, I'll find, if I can find it. And we'll... This is in fact the full result of that review, and you probably can't read the numbers on it, but it basically said, in accordance with your instructions, blah blah blah. We've reviewed the P&L for the year ended 31 December 2016. The net loss for the year ended was 42,767 and remains unaltered. What's behind that is, however, the actual income, this is in the financial report as well, the actual income had been overstated by about $8,000 or $9,000 because the club liability insurance that we do a group buying agreement for had been treated as income when it's in fact a pass-through payment. So that meant that it should have been actually put into a suspense account in the balance sheet and held there, as I said, as a pass-through payment. So we collect on behalf of the affiliated clubs for public liability insurance, and in a group buying deal we then pay that to the broker, the insurance broker. Well, in the case of the 2016 accounts, because of lack of knowledge, I believe, of the there was a staff turnover in the office, there was accountants engaged, new accountants engaged. They didn't understand the commercial relationship with that, so that meant that the income was overstated. But because that's money in, money out, moving that to the balance sheet left the P&L intact. So it actually had no impact. So if you see on social media, I can remember a quote saying there's a cover-up at ACMA or whatever. There's no such thing. There was an error, basically. But the net effect of that, the other factor that this was included as income was that it was actually included as income because of misunderstanding about the insurance. It was actually included as income under the ACMA recovery that we do for those things. So that's the ACMA component of it. So that's been resolved, and I don't think anyone can think there's a major issue in terms of the resolution of that error. That, as I said, amounts to about $8,000 or $9,000 and had no impact on the P&L. So that's good. I just wanted to cover that for there. And I'll just get back to the where we were before.
Does that answer your question? It's probably... Thank you.
So we actually, that cost us $3,000, by the way, to get that result, but I think it was money well spent.
Okay.
And we just need to go into the view again. What's wrong with it? I need to get focus. There you go.
Cool.
So, did everyone confirm that was enough?
Yes. Any other questions?
Just, I understand it takes time. What time frame do you reckon it'll be to get the profit and loss back into the black?
Do you want me to answer?
No. The time frame, like one of the things that changes we put in place, that obviously when we took over the institute, the burn rate obviously was exceeding the income rate. So we put in place a number of measures, but we had a lot of lead time on contracts. The contracts we're dealing with had like 3 months, in some cases more, lead time to adjust. The focus that we took initially was to try and make the biggest difference as fast as we could. And we didn't see increasing the membership as one of the options that was first on our list to fix it. And it came down to the magazine, and we went from 11 issues a year down to 6 issues a year. It's not something unique to us. NZ, our New Zealand equivalent, NZAOT, actually did that more than a decade ago to reduce like their magazine for exactly the same reasons. But I will, if you bear with me again.
Do you want to leave it till the finance report?
No, I'm going to do it now. So seeing people have asked the question.
Okay.
Now this isn't officially part of the AGM, but this is the P&L for the first period that we've got complete numbers on till the end of April. And I'll get to the bottom page of that. Actually, I haven't. Yeah, I apologise for that. So, just a second. So, yeah. I can actually zoom it there. They're the months with the P&L as the bottom line, and they're the first 4 months of the year. And you can see it'll bounce up and down month to month because we have payments up around sort of the $10,000 mark hitting us like in each month. So you can have a good month and then it goes, as you can see, from February to March and whatever, it changes. Basically, as I say, we're currently, as at the end of April, at 18,000 in the green, which is a huge change from last year. But it's going to bounce around. I suspect that we won't, I wouldn't say that I'd be comfortable we're running neutral, and probably until the beginning of the second half of the year, so around July and so on. So we'll expect that to still go like negative every now and then until we start building up a reserve, which we haven't got in terms of the operating accounts. We've got reserves in terms of reserve accounts, but that's where it's at in terms of where they're there. But there's other things that we've got to do, particularly in terms of the ACMA contract coming up again in February next year. The current shape and form of that isn't something we'd want to continue in terms of it's very transaction based, and yet we've got standing cost. Example like call sign management, we do that for members and non-members. The examinations we do for members and non-members. And what's actually happening is that the WIA is actually subsidising slightly to the tune of around 20,000 a year the provision of those services to amateurs. Now, I think one of the main reasons that from the WIA's point of view going forward is that without the examination process and without the call sign management, obviously there isn't much future for the amateur cohort. One of the things in the latest LCD stuff that I saw from ACMA is the fact that there doesn't seem to be a view that the treatment of the AACP may in fact change. They've obviously moved away from that in other like licence management areas. Anyway, I'll close with that and we'll get back to the main thing. So, ask for questions, actually, I forgot to.
Any more questions?
Bob Ecclestone, VK2ZRE. Just on the issue of our the new amateur organisation that's sprung up, how does the risk committee view their operation? Are you seeing it as a threat, or are you seeing it as just competition?
You want me to? Yeah. I'll try and use this microphone, unless I can have that one. I don't think a threat is the way we'd see it. Like we have no objection to other organisations trying to operate in that space, but there's a couple of things that are set in concrete. The IARU will only recognise one peak body within Australia. That's a given, and that's not going to change. I haven't quite finished, but I'll get to.
Could you just expand? I'm out of this loop.
In terms of expand what I'm talking about, there's another there was a group established, I guess, a couple of years ago called the Wireless Institute of Australia Reform Group, and they felt that there was a need for change in the within the organisation and a need to refresh the board. And they started a fairly active campaign to actually spill the board. Sorry? But anyway, that campaign resulted in them getting sufficient numbers of members to request a special general meeting to achieve that spill, which was around, what, February last year? Now, part of the issue with that was that was right in the middle of an election process. So there was an election process already in flight where there were new candidates, and that entire board was up for re-election. The problem with what they, and this is what they put up, if they'd actually managed to spill the board, the organisation would have had to go into administration because the election process hadn't finished. And that would have been at full commercial rates for administration, so the cost of doing that would have been very high, and it's my personal opinion that it is highly likely the organisation would have ceased to exist, at least in its current form, as a result of that. So, in terms of what their motivations were, I think their initial motivations were light in terms of getting change. I don't think that was a problem, and I think it was probably useful there. And with apologies to ex-members of the board, there's probably a time in terms of tenure on the board that you do actually require a turnover, and one of the things we've discussed is actually putting tenure limits on both board positions and committee positions to actually avoid this sort of problem in the future. Does that sort of give you some idea? Now, what's happened with that is it's morphed into, basically, once the election occurred, they basically put out some publicity saying job done, we're going away, and we thought that's all good, but they didn't. About 3 or 4 months later, they'd got, I believe, addicted to the process of rattling the cage and throwing hand grenades in based on half information, misinformation. The finance, I think, is a clear example of like there was a video roadshow that went around which I actually saw before I got elected, and I thought like a lot of the stuff that was in that wasn't actually sustainable just from a point of view of accounting practices, and it in fact showed a lack of actual knowledge of accounting. The other factor that occurred during that time, there was a revolving door of treasurers. And some of those treasurers didn't understand accrual accounting. And one of them, actually, we have board minutes, was requesting a change to a cash book. Now, you can't run an organisation like this, which has got 5-year memberships, which is future income, on a cash book, as much as it'd be nice and simple and able to do. But the reality is there aren't that many people that have a solid understanding of accrual accounting. Like, just around the room, who understands accrual accounting? As I say, it's not
above average.
But when you've got a treasurer that doesn't understand it, it's a bit of a worry. I won't name which one it was. But the end result is, at the end of 2016, the accrual accounting had been thrown out. And when we took over in 2017, the accruals weren't being done, and that resulted in a notional overstatement of the P&L, because future income, particularly from the 5-year memberships, was being included as current income. I'm giving you some idea of some of the issues. So there were issues in the accounting space, but the only thing is, I believe, at this point, we've got that under control, and it's taken us a fair while. As I said, that audit report that I showed you was, I think, dated 19th of December last year. So it's taken us a while to bring things under control from that point of view. But the organisation then effectively reformed as a group called RASA, which is Radio Amateur Society of Australia. And they've effectively positioned themselves as a parallel organisation. And they've actively sought to inject themselves into ACMA and into, in fact, into the IRRU. And in fact, they went to the IRRU and represented themselves as representative of the amateur cohort, and that's led to some consternation, and you can actually see on their sort of website their revised version of their interaction with RASA, interaction with the IARU. So now, in terms of their right to do that, except for the IRRU, which is, as I say, they will only recognise one peak body. So that's actually caused issues with the IRRU, and actually caused issues for a director in the IRRU which didn't understand the relationship with RASA, and caused them some political loss of face, in fact. But the thing is, I don't think as a group we've got a problem with other organisations. It's basically no different to clubs. We've got the state bodies like ARVIC and New South Wales that overlap with some areas what the WI does, and there's no particular issue with that. But the issue that we see with RASA is that it's an issue that some people have been sort of standing on both sides of the fence, basically, and that's causing it. But I won't say any more on that. All right, is there any other questions on that? Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, Roger, 2ZRH. What does the board intend to do concerning those 5 missing issues of amateur radio in terms of both the traditional approach and perhaps a more modern approach as to being a journal of record, as well as providing information and support for the members, if not to mention the amateur community in general. The second part of this question is that you're sitting on a treasure trove of material which would be of wide interest. I frequently answer questions from people directly and in public as well about information and articles which you can reference in Amateur Radio magazine. And unfortunately, there's no good place to pick it all up. And you know, you could market an enormous amount of material at great expense well, I should say great income rather than expense, and you know, fill in the income hole. Just like the RSGB and the ARRL do. Other societies do it to a lesser extent. So what's your thinking there, and what's your forward plans? And that would include, of course, getting the Publications Committee on side. Thank you.
Okay. Peter. I think we'll split that question. I'll get Greg to talk about the fantastic meeting they had yesterday with the club president's lunch, and I won't steal his thunder. So that's the marketing and promotion of the hobby to a wider cohort. So I'll let Greg talk about that. But from the AR magazine, and I'll say the flagship magazine of the organisation, there is about to be a huge amount of work in that space. Yes, we've had to go back to the 6, and Greg talked about why that was the case, but there is in place the ability to actually increase the amount of advertising in that magazine, and the intent is very much to make it self-funding through advertising. If you look at, I don't know, CQ magazine, QST, etc., well, and not even just amateur radio magazines. Any occupational group magazine, you open it up, there is a lot more advertising in it, and that advertising is funding those magazines. So that's one area. Greg also has a bit of a barrow he pushes at every board meeting, which is a very good one, and it's about the fact that we do not actually target anything in the magazine towards foundation licensees. We had a column for a little while, but really we need to, and there is a space, and what we're hearing is a space where we need to supply quite basic information and continually supply that information. So that's one other area. The other area you have seen in the last 2 editions of AR, you've seen an article from a fellow organisation, an actual, the ARRL. So we have an agreement within the IARU that we share information between societies. And so that we share it to them, they share it to us. So if there are articles that come up which we believe are of interest more generally, they're going to start appearing in AR magazine. The other thing is we need, and Peter Freeman puts out quite a bit, we need articles. If you are writing and doing interesting material in AR, write it up and please send it in. So that's part of the amateur radio side of it and the promotion side of it, but I'll hand to Greg because just for a quick overview of the President's lunch yesterday.
The lunch yesterday was interesting because it started, I guess, with quite a strong challenge towards the WIA in terms of where we're at and where we were going, and whether we were a basket case sort of on its last legs. And I hope that's not the case. We've been around in one form or another for over 100 years. And, so we really got to look at what it makes to make sure that we can potentially become relevant in another 100 years. So that was one of the discussion areas at the President's meeting, is the fact that this hobby started as a pure experimental hobby. It was basically chasing like leading edge technology, while like the radio, which was sort of roughly akin to magic at that time. But today, of course, the phone that most people have in their pocket can way outdo anything that HF radio or whatever can do. So we've got to look at other areas of sourcing members for this hobby, and probably generalising it so that it's not so narrow of being about just radio and contests and so on. It needs to move to a wider experimental base, and like there's some of that in what we do, and like people, one of the people yesterday talked about that their area of interest is moonbounce and so on, and other people have obviously got satellite, and those things are still very interesting to people. But if you're talking about the younger generation, the idea of talking to someone on the other side of the world, that when I was sort of 12, 13, 14 at West Lakes Radio Club in the YRCS scheme that Rex Black had started, it was really exciting to talk to someone in Russia or the US or whatever, on the old Galaxy 5 for those that remember it. But which sort of dates me, but anyway, the great thing about the discussion yesterday is we got on to what's missing in the WIA, and we actually have supposedly a marketing group, but its activity is zero. And I brought that up as something that was an area we really needed to fix, because without that we're just going to see a continued drop in membership. And it's not just that people are dissatisfied the WIA in terms of the older members. As I said, it's the concessional members where we've got the biggest drop. Obviously we're going to see a natural fall off in that area, but we've got to compensate in terms of people coming in to add vitality and reduce the average age of the cohort. The great thing that came out of that meeting yesterday was an agreement by about 5 or 6 people, 6 people, to actually start up a marketing group. We probably need a better name than marketing group. I'd like something like the Next 100-Year Group or something like that would be the way that I'd actually want it to be positioned. And that was, to me, in fact, I sort of pressed people in terms of, it's one thing to say what's wrong, it's another thing to say, like, we're all the WIA. It's not just the group of people that were silly enough to put ourselves up for election. It's about everyone working that, and that group, I think, is one of the great sort of, from my point of view, achievements. It hasn't done anything yet, but it's a big change from the seeing it's only been constituted less than 24 hours. But that, to me, was a fantastic outcome from that meeting. So, do you want to make a few comments on it? Okay.
covered it.
All right, thank you.
We're looking forward to working towards the future.
Can I also say the Beyond 2020 presentation, which is, I think, the first presentation after lunch, I think it is, also goes into the plan ahead. So, okay, all right. I'm also conscious of time, so have we got any other questions? Okay.
I'll try and keep my question brief. You mentioned RASA before. Sorry to bring it back up again. I read with a little bit of dismay a letter on VK2CA's website. Those that haven't read it, it's probably good to read, but I'd like to get your side of the story. I just didn't think it was right that you'd be casting him out of WAA, if that's what he said he was going to happen.
Be careful. The first thing, why was he dismayed, if you can ask him?
Sorry?
Ask why he was dismayed.
Can I ask why you're dismayed about that?
Well, why would you cancel someone's membership of the WIA if they're also associated with another organisation? It's like if I'm the president of the Sunshine Coast Amateur Radio Club, but if I also join the Red Tip Club, why would my club get rid of me?
Oh no, okay. And you wouldn't. Can I?
Yeah, microphone up.
Yeah, okay. Or do you want to answer this? Can I first say this particular matter was brought up by there were 4 members, as you probably read, and the board is deliberating on it.
Okay.
No decision's been made, and in fact that was the reason why we put out the news the press release. It is in deliberations at the moment, and Alan chose to go public with it.
Right.
But can I just add a suggestion? I'll just add a little on that. You mentioned why wouldn't you be a member of one or the other. There's no reason why not. There's no reason everyone here can't be a member of RASA if they think they'll get something out of it. But the issue was under the Constitution, the members basically, was it 5.7? I think 5.7 under the Constitution. They basically raised issues with certain members that those members fell foul of 5.7, and 5.7 sets codes of conduct basically. Now 5.8, which is in our news item, says that whatever we do, whether we make a decision yes, no or whatever, there is an appeal process. But the issue about being a member of multiple organisations isn't the problem. But if you look at it from a corporate point of view, I used to work for a multinational in a IT space, IBM. But if you got a new job at what they saw as a competitor, you were sent on gardening leave basically, because it was seen that you were now across a conflict of interest. And that's the issue on this particular thing. It's not around sort of being multiple members. You could be a member of the RSGB, the ARRL and anything else you want to. It's not an issue. It's the behaviour that was the point in question under 5.7. And again, it's a member-initiated thing that the board had no option other than to act on. So basically...
Those 2 parts of the Constitution.
Okay. They're in the letter.
I'll just say I'm Peter Clee, the Secretary, and the email that was included with Mr Meredith's publication came from me, and it is accurate. It includes also the 2 sections of the Constitution, 5.7, which says that if the member is not considered in the best interest of the institute, the board can make that decision, but then 5.8 provides for the appeal process. Happy to chat with you later on if you...
Okay, any other questions? Con?
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I'm Colin Concilio, BK3 NCC. I've had to write it out, otherwise I'll just get confused, and I'll just bear with me. Mr President, it is indeed comforting to hear your restatement that the board is absolutely focused on being open and transparent and I think it confirms that this board has the interest of the hobby and members at heart. So thank you personally, and I think I speak on behalf of most people here too. Australia is blessed to have a freedom of information legislation, and the ACMA is required under this legislation to publish on its website information that has been released in response to any FOI requests. In mid-December 2017, the ACMA released onto its website a log of information with the heading Documents Concerning Amateur Radio Licensing Arrangements. And since the WIA is involved in issuing certificates of proficiency, the ACMA and the WIA must have some documents there related to it. This machine is driving me mad. Hang on a second. Now, when I went through these documents, I thought they must have bought about 15 packs of Texticolour, black Texticolour, and I'm thinking they've cornered the market on it, and I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? As I went through, I also noticed that there's at least one document that seems to be missing in a sequence as well. So in the spirit of continuing openness and goodwill, can the board assure me and everybody else who's interested that the blackening out of the information is not due to the board's actions? And further, the WIA can review the documents that have been placed into the public domain and take action so that they can be replaced with documents or versions of the originals that will in fact still provide true and unambiguous information.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the information that is blanked out, and this is blanked out by the ACMA, this is not, I'll just clarify that, it's not blanked out by the WIA. The information that's blanked out is of mainly personal information. So if you read the FOI Act, the Commonwealth FOI Act, there are a range of exemptions that can be asked for. We are a third party in this, so under the FOI Act, we're actually a third party because we are a service provider to the ACMA. We provide services on behalf of the ACMA, and so there is personal information, there is commercial in confidence information, and there are a range of other exemptions that you can put forward. And the ACMA has to, under that legislation, look at that information and apply those exemptions as they go through these documents. So that is what the ACMA has actually done. So the information that is in those documents is either commercial in confidence, it's personal information, so it's names, email addresses, etc., etc. And there is one particular document that is currently in deliberation with the Office of the Australian Information Commission. So I actually can't say anything about that because it's a current matter, but the documents that have been put up, I can say the information that's been blanked out, there's no conspiracy theory behind this. This is the ACMA applying exemptions to these documents so that what has been asked for by the person who's asked for this is actually applied accordingly, and they only get the information that they have asked for. So it's personal information, commercial in confidence, and it actually relates to what they asked for. That's the reason that's the reason why you end up with documents that there are 3 lines in there and the rest of it's blanked out. Because the only thing in that document that is relevant to what's being asked for is that 3 lines.
Could I just, did you find anything interesting in looking at those documents?
That's the other question.
Seriously. Because I believe it was simply a fishing trip, so, but to use it. But did you actually find anything that was piqued your interest in any particular aspect? Have they been covered today?
We're getting that slide, very slide.
Are you prepared to ask questions on those?
Not at this stage.
Okay, all right. Any further questions? Okay, I'm really conscious of time right at the moment. If we need to get to things, so yeah, if we can keep it short, that'd be great.
It's Arthur 2BBI again. Just something a bit more nuts and bolts. Can you give us an update on the ticketing system, on the new ticketing system?
Okay.
can I actually leave that until the open forum talks? Because there is, and in fact in the Beyond 2020 there is a bit on the ticketing system as well. So we'll actually cover that.
Yeah, Tony, VK3TZ. Just with respect to the services that we provide on behalf of the ACMA, call sign administration and licensing, examinations. Just a clarification, is it correct that we're basically a shortfall of 20,000 approximately per annum for that? Is that correct? And if it is, or if we're not recovering all our costs, what measures are going to be in place so that we can recover those costs?
I can well and truly answer that. Okay, and Greg talked about this earlier. When we first put in place the deed in 2009, we went through a process, and it was a long and torturous process of coming up with a cost recovery model. Because under the legislation we actually have to recover costs based on, and there are cost recovery policies and procedures that the Commonwealth put in front of us. We came up, we did time and motion studies, we did all sorts of things to come up with what we charged for those services, which was acceptable to both the ACMA and ourselves. That model hasn't changed. So that's the reason why we've got in the order of 20,000, I don't know what the figure is, but in the order of 20,000 from the point of view of we are not recovering that cost. We're not recovering real cost. So what we are doing in that is we are actually rebasing. So yes, it may cost more, and I'll put my hand up and say, put my hand on my heart and say it may cost more, because of things like postage and the processing of those applications. So from that perspective, yes, that's the reason why. It's based on a 2009 model, and we are having to actually revisit that and bring it into 2018.
Just on that, in the initial negotiation with ACMA, they came back and said, no, you are going to spend a greater level of effort here. So they increased our recovery out to what we estimated initially on the first negotiation.
And you've got to factor in things like postage. Postage in those 9 years has gone through the roof. So that's why we want to go online, and as much as we can online, including assessments. I'll just say that. Okay, any final questions? Okay, I will put the director's report to a vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Motion first.
Sorry?
Motion to accept.
Motion to accept, sorry. Thank you, Mr Secretary. He does it to me all the time. A motion to accept the director's report. Bless you. No, we've already got a mover and a seconder for that. So we've got those. We've been in discussion, so we're now. So all those in favour? Aye. Cool. Against? Okay, carried. Cool. Okay, can I please, let me go the right way. Can I please ask for a minute's silence for these particular members who fell silent during the last year? I've highlighted 3 there who are VK7JK, VK3PC and VK3ACA, who are all actually life members of the Wallace Institute who fell silent. So can I, in respect of those silent keys, can I please have a minute's silence? Thank you very much. Okay, the audit report, which is also attached to your document that you picked up. Can I have someone to move that we accept the audit report? Hang on, who put up their hand first? I think David, 5KK, and a seconder. Rafi, 2RF. And discussion and questions.
No, make a comment rather than
Hi. You may have been given the impression that the WA's, you know, on the ropes financially. Just want to point out some numbers. Maybe people haven't read it properly, but we've got $285,000 in the bank as at 31st December. And by the looks of the April accounts, which is interim, maybe another 18,000 up. There's a property worth in the books 425. Although I believe you've had a valuation, I still believe it's worth far more. There's a website somewhere called On the House that says it's 788,000, for better or for worse. It says it's high credibility. We're not in a financial problem, but we mustn't, you know, lose sight of the fact we need to meet our commitments all the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rafi.
Any other questions? Okay, I will put it to the vote. All those in favour of accepting the financial reports, please show. And all those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, the appointment of the auditor. Can I have somebody to move that we appoint Kidmans as the auditors for the financial year of 2018? Ewan, Cloud, and a seconder, Roger, 2ZRH. Any discussion?
Correct. I know you were only required to have a review, and you decided that you will have an audit again? Yeah.
We have decided that we will have an audit again in 2018, hence the need for an auditor, and we actually have to do that, so we can only do it here. Okay.
And give the reasons for that.
Yep, go.
It's a cost to the organisation, and it costs us just under 10,000, I think 9,600 for this year. It actually cost 14,000 last year, I think, because of other issues. But from my point of view, there was sufficient concern, noise, questions, and whatever that for the time being, I expect we'll be appointing an auditor for the next few years. And if you look at it from the total revenue of the organisation being around 500,000, we're basically spending about like 10,000 of that, 2%, to do that. So I think it's justified. I think it gives confidence. It means, and it was the reason that we went through the process of looking at going through the 2016 accounts again, because when the questions were raised, we felt the only way that we could actually close them off was to do it through an independent party, third party.
Thanks, Craig. All those in favour of appointing Kidmans, please raise your hand. Any against? Okay, carried. Now the next item of business is the constitutional amendments. Now these amendments were actually notified in AR March-April edition of AR. They are tidy-ups and they are also cost-saving measures because it allows us to do electronic voting, not having to post things out. I mentioned the cost of post earlier. It actually enables us to do electronic voting, which is a huge cost saving for the organisation.
Can you read out the clauses? Or are you just going to leave it?
No. Does anybody need me to actually read out the clauses?
Just to refresh your memory, please.
they're not in this pack.
Okay, all right. Amend the Constitution as followed. In clause interpretation, in clause 4.2 definitions, insert the new definition of an officer after the definition of office and before the provision of before the definition of a provisional member, and the officer definition has the same meaning given to it as in clause 29D1 of the Constitution, and all references to officer in the Constitution will be replaced with officer with a capital O. So that's a update. In clause 7, the annual subscriptions, delete clause 7.2, which is the first annual subscriptions, so that the clause 7.2 now will read not used. It's the first, it's when it was set up. In clause 12, directors, delete clause 12.2, the first board, so clause 12.2 also reads not used. References to clause 12.6 in the current clause 14.1, which will become clause 14.2, see the point 4 below, will be removed so that the new clause 14.2 A and D will read, and A is, at every annual general meeting, 1/2 of the directors or in their number is not a whole multiple of 2, then the number nearest to but not exceeding 1/2, this has got to be drafted by a lawyer, must retire from office, provided that no director may retain office for more than 2 years or after the second annual general meeting following the director's appointment, whichever is the longer. A retiring director must act as a director throughout the meeting at which the director retires, and an election of directors must take place each year. And clause D is no person except a director retiring by rotation or a person recommended by the directors for election is eligible for election to the office of director at any meeting unless the person being a member or some member intending to propose the person has at least 45 days before the meeting left at the office a notice in writing. This is one long sentence. Signed, there's no comma in there. Signed by the nominee giving the nominee's consent to nomination and signifying the nominee's candidature for the office or the intention of such member to propose. Full stop. Notice of each and every candidature must be forwarded to all members no less than 28 days or such lesser period as is time from time permitted by the Corporations Act prior to the meeting at which the election is to take place. And 4, in clause 14, appoint and removal of directors as in clause 14.1, election of directors as follows. And 14.1 election of directors is election of directors shall be conducted before each annual general meeting by postal ballot or electronic means in accordance with the WIA ballot regulations as amended by the board from time to time. The current clause 14.1 directors retirement by rotation and filling the vacant offices will now be clause 14.2 directors retirement by rotation and filling of offices, and the current 14.2 removal of directors will now be clause 14.3 removal of directors, and references to the current clause 14.1 and current clause 14.2 will be amended to refer to clause 14.2 and 14.3 respectively. And the references to postal ballot is now for clause 14.2C and will be replaced with postal or electronic ballot. Now these have been, just so you're aware, there is a bit of a linkage to, I suppose, a linkage to the past here because these were actually drafted by Jenny Owen, who is Michael Owen's daughter, who is actually a lawyer and also a constitutional lawyer. So that's where these particular amendments came from. So does that, any further discussion? Questions? Questions?
Was any thought given to having potential directors have a tenure of more than 5 years as a licensee?
I can answer that. Thank you very much for that question. There are...
Hang on.
Oh, sorry.
The opportunity for stacking a board by force of that document.
there are a number of other changes that we would like to make to the Constitution. What we hoped to get passed here today was the basic cleaning up of the initial Constitution. Ultimately, we would like to rewrite the entire Constitution in a plain English type version to make it easier to read. Jenny Owen has suggested a number of changes, including the 5-year requirement, but it was too much to put to one meeting. So we will attempt to look at that perhaps in 6 months or 12, or at the next AGM we will have some more constitutional changes. It's probably a 5-year process to rewrite the Constitution. That's a really big job. So we're looking at doing things a little bit at a time to make sure that we get it right, and then we'll move forward with stage 2 and stage 3. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I will put it to the vote that we accept the, under special resolution, to change the Constitution to those particular amendments. Sorry?
Move, yes.
VK2EJ.
And a seconder?
John.
Rex, VK7MO. Okay.
If when they vote, if they could please leave their hands with it, we need a 75% majority.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to vote. Now, we need a 75% majority for this particular vote, so can you please leave your cards up so that we can actually do a count?
This is in favour?
In favour, yes, all those in favour of the changes, sorry, yes. Thank you.
Actually, that's a 75% majority.
And any against? Okay, thank you.
Any against?
Any against?
No, that's easy.
No, that's easy. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, I move on to the election declaration. There were 3 retiring directors this time round, which was David Ford, Phil Waite and Brian Clark. And our returning officer, John Marshall, let us know that we're to congratulate Brian Clark back onto the board, and also Aidan Mountford, who many of you probably walked past, beavering away at a keyboard. So there are 2 new directors, and as I mentioned earlier, we still have a vacancy, and the board is actively looking for, in this case, a female. Or if we can't find a female for the board, we're looking for another member. So if you are interested, talk to one of these people, please.
How about someone who's under 30 as well?
And someone who's under 30, oh, now there's a demographic cohort. Do I dare do a poll of anyone who's under 30 in the room?
To what purpose?
Just Steve Clark, is there any particular skill set or trait that you're looking for with statements?
Okay, I mentioned in my talk, we are certainly looking for obviously management, marketing, finance, media and strategy positions. So marketing and promotion is a big area, as you heard from Greg. So if you have that sort of skill set, we would love to hear from you. Because that is an area that is we've identified as needing some work. All right. Okay. We move to thank yous, I think.
The election of the returning officer.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the election of the returning officer. Can I have somebody to move that we appoint John Henry Marshall as the returning officer for 2018? VK2VE and a seconder, VK2ZRH. And I don't think there's going to be any. Is that a question? Is that a question or a discussion? No? Okay, all those in favour, please. And against? I hope John doesn't put up his hand. Okay, we'll move to the vote of thanks. Now, I will call out, there is a huge list here, and as I mentioned earlier, there is well over 100 people on a variety of committees, but the top of this list is actually Bruce and Petra, and so I would put a vote of thanks to our office staff, Bruce and Petra, who do a fantastic job, and also the over 100 people, and you only need to go to the webpage to see the list of those names who basically make this organisation run. So I would just like a bit of a show of appreciation for all of those volunteers. Okay, now we can announce that the next AGM is actually in Sydney. Now I'm not sure whether our Sydney representative is here and would like to get up and make a few words, say a few words.
Morning members, my name is Tony, VK2KZ, and we've got a little presentation here that we were going to do to try and convince you all that it was a great idea to come to Sydney and that it was going to be very persuasive and it was going to be impossible for you to refuse, and then we saw the agenda and it said the next meeting's in Sydney, so...
Do you want to get up here? I should plug in there.
So just excuse me for a moment while we plug in. Unfortunately this...
You've got a HDMI.
HDMI.
No, you take this one off. Yeah. What have you got? Is it the same?
It's the same, so if we just go in the side there.
Oh, cool. It's the same connector.
It's just the other side. Yeah, it's just... So just bear with us for a moment. People in the room. That's it. Lovely.
Thanks again.
Other way up, I think. So.
We're technologists, we can do this.
Now, there'll be a thing that appears up here. Up in the top line, there should be a drop down, a little box with the code name with it.
There it is.
Cool. Okay, all yours.
So, as I said before, I'm a member of the Waverley Amateur Radio Society. Waverley Amateur Radio Society. We're not absolutely sure, well, we know for certain that the next year represents the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the club. I'm not knowledgeable enough in amateur radio to know if that represents the oldest club in Australia or the world. I've only been in this hobby since 2009. I should have done it much sooner, but there you are, that's another story. In order to celebrate the club's anniversary, we're going to take on a couple of activities, one of which we hope is an ISS contact. We're going to work with a girls' school in Sydney about that. That matter's ongoing at the moment. It might or might not come up. We'll just have to see how it goes. I was now going to talk to you about how wonderful Sydney is and how you should definitely have the conference there next year. But since that's already decided, in the spirit of that, I'll just run through the quick presentation very quickly, so as not to waste too much time. This is previous conference locations in the last few years, certainly since I've been in the hobby. Notice there's a little bit of a wobble with Norfolk Island there. Harndorf last year, Gold Coast of course this year, and for 2019 the winner is Sydney, right. We had in addition decided we would try and persuade you all that it was the ideal spot, so we've come along with a little presentation about Sydney, which takes about 5-6 minutes if you just bear with us.
Oh. Now the sound. Just pause it.
Okay, sorry.
Pause it. There.
That's fine.
There.
Just use the sound there. That's it. We can. Sorry about this. Blast you out.
Back.
coast of Australia, few cities are as geographically spectacular as Sydney, the capital of the state of New South Wales and home to over 4.5 million people. Surrounded by the rolling Pacific Ocean, two dramatic headlands stand as a timeless gateway to one of the world's most beautiful harbours. Blessed with over 100 beaches, bathed in year-round sunshine and buzzing with a youthful vitality, when it comes to the good life, Sydney is hard to top. Sydney's heart is the harbour. What began as a penal colony in 1788 would within a century be transformed into paradise. From its rough and tumble beginnings in an area known as the Rocks, Sydney soon threw off its convict shackles and blossomed into a gracious city, filled with Victorian architecture and public gardens. New arrivals came by the boatload in search of a new life. The city expanded into gorgeous inner city suburbs like Paddington, harbour neighbourhoods like Rose Bay, and into beachside communities up and down the coast. For first-timers, Sydney can feel like a maze of beaches, headlands, bays and coves. The quickest way to find your bearings is to take a trip to the top of Sydney Tower. From over 800 feet up, the observation deck offers 360-degree views of the entire city. Once you've come to grips with the layout of the city, head to Circular Quay, Sydney's version of Grand Central Station. From Circular Quay, you can get just about anywhere by ferry, water taxi or train. Just to the right, like white sails billowing in the breeze, is the Sydney Opera House. You don't need a ticket or tuxedo to explore this incredible performance venue. Whichever way you look, inside or outside, up or down, the Opera House is nothing less than an architectural miracle. Just behind the Opera House, on the site of Sydney's first farm, are the Royal Botanic Gardens and the Sydney Domain. Here you'll find Government House, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and some of the leafiest views in Sydney. To the left of Circular Quay stands the famous coat hanger, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. One of Sydney's famous sons, Paul Hogan, the star of Crocodile Dundee, was a painter on the bridge before he hit the big time. But you don't need to work on the bridge to enjoy the views from the top. Simply strap on a safety harness and join a bridge climb tour. Just across the bridge at Luna Park, you'll find Sydney's most famous smile. The rides are a little on the vintage side, but the locals wouldn't have it any other way. This heritage-listed fun park has been thrilling Aussie families since 1935. Just a short ferry ride from Luna Park is Darling Harbour, one of Sydney's urban renewal triumphs. Once the site of rusting railway yards, Darling Harbour is now home to the National Maritime Museum and popular parks, bars and restaurants. Only a few blocks away, you'll find the Powerhouse Museum, a celebration of steam, space and science. A short walk across the Piermont Bridge is the Sydney Sea Life Aquarium, where you'll experience many of Australia's maritime environments, from the Great Barrier Reef to the rugged South Coast. Australia has a reputation as a land of creatures that bite, sting and can even rip off your whole arm. At the Wildlife Sydney Nature Park, say g'day to some of the world's deadliest creatures, as well as some of Australia's most cuddly. But for the zoo with the view, hop back on the ferry and cruise over to Taronga Zoo. Ride the cable car to the top of the hill and follow the paths back down, past some of the happiest and most relaxed looking creatures you'll ever see. And who wouldn't be with views like this? When it's time to cool off, grab your towel and head to Bondi Beach. You haven't experienced Sydney until you felt Bondi's golden sand between your toes. The beach is patrolled year-round by bronzed Aussie lifesavers, but always remember to swim between the flags. Another famous seaside suburb not to be missed is Manly. The 30-minute ferry ride from Circular Quay to Manly Wharf is all part of the adventure. Go for a dip in the gentle harbourside waters of Manly Cove, or head through the historic Corso to Manly Beach. If you've never tried surfing, pack your board shorts. This is the place to learn. Feeling energetic? Hike the coastal paths and bush tracks to North Head for some incredible views back to the city. So, you've climbed the bridge, tackled some Bondi waves and wrangled the wildlife. No doubt you're feeling a little thirsty. Time to partake in one of the great Sydney traditions. Join the locals by the water, raise your ice-cold beer and make a toast to paradise.
Thank you for that, and with that in mind, we look forward to welcoming you to Sydney next year for what we hope is a great conference and to celebrate, among other things, the 100th anniversary of our club. Thank you very much.
And I'll just mention there is some flexibility with the date. We are well and truly aware that this clashes with Dayton, so we are working on that. So watch this space. So, okay, Oh yeah, actually, one of the things that came up last night at Fisherman's Wharf was whether there would be interest in the WIA organising a Dayton tour. So have a think about that, and if there is, then have a chat to Greg or one of the directors, because it got a lot of interest last night. Maybe a show of hands for a Dayton tour organised by the WIA. So a package tour. Who would be interested? Can we just have a bit of a show of hands at who'd be interested in something like that? So if there is, we'll put some effort into a reasonable number of people. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry? We now have the Friedrichshafen tour as well. But anyway, there's interest, which is what we wanted to do. Now, we have bitten into 10 minutes into our yes, okay. Thank you, Peter. Can I just say, after the Sydney presentation, we do, applications are actually open now, obviously, for the 2020 AGM. So if you're interested in hosting the 2020 AGM, then please come and see us. And a question from the back. I have a question as well. Okay. You might want to push the microphone.
Thanks, Justin. Can you tell me when the next year's date for my conference, please? The date in May. Thank you.
The date hasn't actually been set, and there is some flexibility with the date right at the moment. So we're trying to align it so that it doesn't clash with Dayton and a few other things. So I can't actually tell you a date, Ray, at this point in time, but it will be very soon.
And there's questions. More questions.
Graham, VK2FA. Look, I wanted to thank the board for this year, for the efforts that you've put in. You've done a great job. Obviously, it's been in hard times. You've got these terriers attacking you all the time. And I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the previous board, last year's board, because they've done a great job, again with the terriers attacking them. So I'd like everyone to put their hands together and give you the applause that you deserve. Thank you.
Any other questions before we close? One at the very back. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. It's just basically it's the same thing. My wife will be very happy to know that she can start planning for next year's AGM. So job well done, gentlemen, and thank you.
Okay. Cool.
One more question.
I know she had something to say about volunteers, 100 of them. Could there be some consideration given to the assessors as being listed as a volunteer? There's a lot of time goes into assessing, and I think it should be recognised.
Here. Well and truly. Okay, I will close the AGM. Apologies, we're 14 minutes over morning.